The gunshot that echoed through Maple Street at 3:47 p.m. didn't just pierce Colonel Sarah Callahan's uniform, it tore through the fabric of two institutions that were about to collide in ways no one could have imagined. When Officer Derek Mitchell pulled that trigger, he had no idea he'd just shot a woman with Omega-level clearance, a NATO commander whose death would activate protocols buried so deep in military doctrine that even generals didn't know they existed. This is the story of how 1 minute changed everything. I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this incredible true story, and please comment below which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Colonel Sarah Callahan adjusted the rearview mirror of her black SUV one final time. Her daughter Eden, barely 7 years old, sat in the back seat humming a tune she'd learned at school that morning. Something about butterflies and rainbows that seemed to belong to a different world entirely from the one Sarah inhabited daily at Fort Bragg. "Mommy, can we get ice cream after the bank?" Eden's voice carried that particular note of hopeful negotiation that children perfect around the age when they realize their parents aren't entirely immune to their charms. Sarah glanced at her watch. 15:47 hours. She noted automatically, though she'd been trying to think in civilian time when she was with Eden. "We'll see, baby. Depends on how long the line is." She'd been home for exactly 6 days. 6 days since her boots had touched American soil after 18 months of classified operations that she couldn't discuss with anyone outside a handful of people with clearance levels most Americans didn't know existed. 6 days of trying to remember how to be just mommy, instead of Colonel Callahan, Strategic Operations Commander for NATO's Special Activities Division. The uniform felt different on American soil. In Kandahar and Brussels, in those windowless rooms where decisions were made that would never make headlines, it had been armor. Here, driving through the suburbs of Fayetteville, North Carolina, it was supposed to be a symbol of service, of sacrifice, of honor. She'd insisted on wearing it to the bank, partly because she needed to update her documentation with her new rank insignia, partly because Eden loved seeing her in it. "You look like a superhero, Mommy," Eden had said that morning, tracing her small fingers over the eagles on Sarah's shoulders. "Just doing my job, baby girl," Sarah had replied, though the weight of what that job actually entailed pressed against her chest like a physical thing. The bank parking lot was fuller than she'd expected for a Thursday afternoon. Sarah maneuvered the SUV into a spot near the back muscle memory from years of tactical driving, making her automatically position the vehicle for rapid exit if needed. Old habits died hard, even in suburban parking lots. "Can I bring Mr. Whiskers?" Eden held up her stuffed rabbit worn and loved to the point where one ear drooped perpetually. "Of course. Mr. Whiskers is always welcome." They walked hand in hand toward the bank entrance, Eden skipping every few steps, her free hand making Mr. Whiskers dance through the air. Sarah found herself smiling despite the hypervigilance that never quite turned off anymore. This was what she fought for, these moments of pure, uncomplicated joy. This was why she'd spent months in places whose names were classified, making decisions that would haunt her dreams, but keep little girls like Eden safe to skip through parking lots with stuffed rabbits. The bank's air conditioning hit them like a wall of Arctic air, and Eden shivered slightly, pressing closer to her mother's leg. The line was indeed long, at least 15 people ahead of them. Sarah mentally recalculated their afternoon. Ice cream was looking less likely. "Mommy, why is that man staring at us?" Eden whispered, tugging on Sarah's hand. Sarah followed her daughter's gaze to an older white man near the loan officer's desks. He was indeed staring, his expression a mixture of confusion and something darker that Sarah had learned to recognize over the years. She'd seen it in certain corners of the military, in certain towns, in certain looks that lasted a beat too long, when people saw her rank and her skin color and couldn't quite reconcile the two in their minds. "Some people are just curious about the uniform, baby," Sarah said quietly. "It's nothing to worry about." But even as she said it, she felt that familiar tightening in her shoulders, that subtle shift in awareness that had kept her alive in hostile territories. The man was now talking to another customer, gesturing in their direction. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. She'd seen it before. The line moved slowly. Eden grew restless, making Mr. Whiskers perform increasingly elaborate acrobatics. Sarah found herself checking exits, counting people, noting positions, all automatic, all invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. It was exhausting being this alert in what should have been a mundane Thursday afternoon errand. 20 minutes passed. They'd moved perhaps halfway through the line when Sarah heard the sirens. Not unusual, the bank was on a main thoroughfare, but these sirens stopped close, too close. Through the bank's glass doors, she could see the flash of police lights. "Mommy?" Eden's voice had taken on that uncertain quality children get when they sense adult tension, but don't understand its source. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just police officers doing their job." But something was wrong. Sarah could feel it in the way the energy in the bank shifted, the way people started murmuring and moving toward the windows. 2 officers had entered the parking lot and appeared to be running plates, moving systematically through the vehicles. Her SUV. They were spending extra time at her SUV. Sarah's mind ran through possibilities. Her plates were government-issued but civilian-coded, a security measure for officers of her clearance level. Her registration was current. She'd committed no traffic violations. Yet the officers were definitely focused on her vehicle now, one of them speaking into his radio, while the other hand rested on his service weapon. "Ma'am?" A bank teller was trying to get her attention. "Ma'am, I can help you over here." But Sarah's attention was entirely on what was happening outside. One officer was now photographing her license plate, while the other seemed to be peering into the windows of her vehicle. "Mommy, you're squeezing too hard." Eden's voice broke through her focus. Sarah immediately loosened her grip on her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy just needs to step outside for a moment. Can you be a big girl and stand right here by this nice lady?" She indicated the bank teller, a middle-aged black woman whose name tag read Patricia, and whose eyes showed she'd also noticed what was happening outside. "I'll watch her," Patricia said quietly, understanding passing between them in that way it sometimes did between black women who recognized trouble brewing. Sarah walked toward the door, her bearing shifting unconsciously from mother to military officer. Her stride was measured, controlled, professional. She pushed through the glass door into the humid afternoon air. "Officers," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "That's my vehicle. Is there a problem?" Both men turned. They were young, mid to late 20s, Sarah estimated. The taller one, whose nameplate read Mitchell, had the kind of aggressive stance that suggested he'd been waiting his whole life for authority and didn't quite know how to wear it yet. The shorter one, Davidson, according to his nameplate, looked nervous, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "This your vehicle, ma'am?" Mitchell asked, though the ma'am sounded like it cost him something to say. "Yes, officer. Colonel Sarah Callahan, United States Army. Is there an issue?" Mitchell's eyes traveled over her uniform, and Sarah saw the exact moment disbelief crystallized into suspicion. "You got ID to prove that?" It wasn't the question that set off alarm bells in Sarah's mind. It was the tone. The way his hand had shifted to mirror his partner's hovering near his weapon. The way they'd positioned themselves to box her in against the vehicle. "Of course." Sarah moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible as she reached for her military ID. She'd been trained for hostile encounters, though she'd never imagined she'd need that training in a bank parking lot in North Carolina. She handed over her military ID and her driver's license. Mitchell took them, barely glancing at them, before handing them to Davidson. "Run these." "Officer, may I ask what this is about?" Sarah kept her voice calm, professional. "We got a call about a suspicious person in a military uniform. Stolen valor is a crime, ma'am." Sarah felt the absurdity of the situation warring with a growing sense of danger. "As you can see from my identification, I'm an active-duty colonel. This uniform is—" "Anyone can fake an ID," Mitchell interrupted. "You want to tell me how someone like you got to be a colonel?" There it was. Someone like you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Someone like me. Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You know what I mean. Mitchell's hand had moved to rest on his weapon now, not quite drawing it, but making the threat clear. We've had problems with people impersonating military officers, trying to get discounts respect they didn't earn. Davidson had stepped back, speaking quietly into his radio, running her information. Sarah could hear scattered words, claims to be military, and refusing to cooperate, and other phrases that bore no resemblance to what was actually happening. I need you to call Fort Bragg, Sarah said, working to keep her voice steady. Ask for General Morrison's office. He can verify. I don't need to call anyone. Mitchell cut her off. What I need is for you to stop pretending to be something you're not. The crowd was growing now. People had come out of the bank, out of neighboring stores. Phones were appearing in hands that modern instinct to record everything. Sarah was acutely aware of Eden inside the bank, probably watching through the glass, probably frightened. Officer Mitchell, Sarah tried again. I'm asking you to please verify my identity through proper channels. I'm happy to wait while you... Turn around. Excuse me? Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle. Sarah felt the situation spiraling out of control. Officer, I've committed no crime. I've provided valid identification. There's no reason. I said turn around. Mitchell's weapon was half drawn now. Davidson had stepped further back, his own weapon now fully out, but pointed at the ground. I'm not resisting, Sarah said loudly, clearly aware of the recording phones, aware that her words might matter later. I'm a United States Army colonel. My name is Sarah Callahan. I'm complying with your instructions under protest. She turned slowly, placed her hands on the hot metal of her SUV. The sun beat down on her neck. She could hear murmuring from the crowd, some voices raised in protest, others in support of the officers. But loudest in her mind was the sound of her daughter's voice muffled through glass calling for her. Mitchell's hands were rough as he patted her down, far rougher than necessary, lingering in ways that had nothing to do with searching for weapons and everything to do with humiliation. Sarah had endured worse in SEER training, but this was different. This was happening in front of her daughter in her own country while wearing the uniform she'd bled for. Gun! Mitchell shouted suddenly, and Sarah felt the situation shift into something deadlier. That's my service weapon, Sarah said immediately. I'm authorized to carry it. My permit is in my wallet. I'm active duty military. But Mitchell had already drawn his weapon, fully pointing it at her back. Don't move. Don't fucking move. Mommy. Eden's voice cut through everything else. The little girl had broken free from Patricia and was running toward them, Mr. Whiskers clutched in her hand. Eden, stop! Sarah started to turn, maternal instinct overriding tactical training. I said don't move! Mitchell's voice was high-stressed, scared. Eden kept coming, crying now, reaching for her mother. Davidson stepped to intercept her, but Eden dodged around him with the agility of a frightened child. Leave my mommy alone. She's a soldier. She protects people. Eden, baby, go back inside, Sarah pleaded. Still facing the vehicle, Mitchell's gun pressed between her shoulder blades now. No, you're hurting her. Eden grabbed at Mitchell's leg, trying to pull him away from her mother. What happened next would be debated in courtrooms and news cycles for years to come. Mitchell, startled by the child, spun around. His elbow caught Eden in the face, sending her tumbling to the asphalt. Sarah moved instantly, instinctively, turning to go to her daughter. Gun! Mitchell screamed again, though Sarah's service weapon was still holstered, though her hands were reaching for her child, not for any weapon. The sound of the gunshot was impossibly loud in the parking lot. Time seemed to fragment. Sarah felt the impact before she heard it, a punch of force that spun her sideways. She was falling, her mind still trying to process what had happened, her body already responding to trauma. It recognized, even if her conscious mind didn't. The asphalt was hot against her face. She could see Eden just feet away, Mr. Whiskers fallen beside her. The rabbit's one good ear, now spotted with blood. Her blood. Mommy! Eden was crawling toward her, and Sarah tried to reach out, tried to tell her it was okay, but her body wasn't responding correctly. Something was very wrong with her left side, a spreading wetness that was turning her uniform dark. She could hear shouting, so much shouting. Mitchell's voice high and panicked. She was going for her gun. You saw it. She was going for her gun. Davidson's voice horrified. Jesus Christ. Derek, she was trying to help her kid. Other voices from the crowd angry, frightened, demanding answers. But Sarah could only focus on Eden, who had reached her. Now small hands pressing against the wound in her side, trying to stop the bleeding with the futile determination of a child who believed she could fix anything if she just tried hard enough. It's okay, baby, Sarah managed to whisper, though she could taste copper in her mouth. Mommy's okay. But she wasn't. She could feel it in the way her body was growing cold despite the heat of the day, in the way the edges of her vision were growing dark. She'd seen enough combat wounds to recognize what was happening. With effort that felt superhuman, she reached for her pocket. Not for any weapon, but for the phone there. Her fingers were clumsy, slick with blood, but she managed to unlock it, managed to press the contact that would change everything. The phone rang once before a familiar voice answered. Colonel Callahan. Delta, Oscar, 7, Whiskey. Sarah forced out the code through lips that didn't want to work anymore. Officer down. Immediate. Immediate extract required. My daughter. Sarah, what's happening? Where are you? But Sarah couldn't answer anymore. The phone slipped from her fingers. She could see Eden's face above her streaked with tears and blood. Her blood, the child trying to be brave the way Sarah had taught her. Badge. Sarah whispered, her eyes finding the small pin on Eden's shirt, her grandfather's military badge, the one Eden wore everywhere like a talisman. Show them. The badge. Eden's hands fumbled with the pin, holding it up like a shield against the chaos around them. My mommy's a hero, she screamed at the officers, at the crowd, at the universe itself. She has Omega clearance. She protects everyone. Sarah wanted to tell her daughter that clearance levels didn't matter here, that sometimes the uniform wasn't protection, but a target, that sometimes the country you served didn't serve you back. But she had no breath left for words. The last thing Colonel Sarah Callahan saw before the darkness claimed her was her daughter's face, fierce and brave and heartbroken, and the faded silver eagle on her grandfather's badge catching the light, like a promise of justice that might come too late. The parking lot of the First National Bank of Fayetteville fell silent, except for the sound of a 7-year-old girl crying over her mother's still form, and the distant wail of sirens that would arrive 60 seconds too late to matter. What Officer Derek Mitchell didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Colonel Sarah Callahan's phone call had triggered protocols that were already in motion. At Fort Bragg, 15 miles away, alarms were sounding in buildings that didn't officially exist. Encrypted communications were flying between installations across the country. The words Omega clearance and Officer down were creating ripples that would become tsunamis. Because Sarah Callahan wasn't just any colonel. She was one of only 17 people in the entire United States military, with Omega-level clearance, a classification so secret that most 4-star generals didn't know it existed. She was the strategic mind behind operations that had prevented 3 terrorist attacks on American soil in the past year alone. She was the liaison between NATO command and intelligence services whose names were never spoken aloud. And she was a black woman who had just been shot by a white police officer in front of her 7-year-old daughter in broad daylight while wearing the uniform of the country she'd sworn to defend. The timer had started. 60 seconds until the world Derek Mitchell knew ceased to exist. 59. 58. At the Pentagon, secure phones were ringing in offices with no nameplates on the doors. At the NSA, computers were automatically archiving every piece of digital communication from a 5-mile radius around the shooting. At Fort Bragg, unmarked helicopters were spinning up their crews, running toward them in full tactical gear. "Mommy, please wake up," Eden whispered, pressing her small hands harder against the wound as if love alone could stop the bleeding. "Please, Mommy, you promised we'd get ice cream." The crowd was growing larger, angrier. Someone had recognized the unit insignia on Sarah's uniform, the Special Operations Command patch, that meant she was no ordinary soldier. Voices were rising, demanding answers. Why had they shot her? Why hadn't they listened? Why hadn't they simply made a phone call? Mitchell was backing away, his gun still drawn but pointed at the ground, now his face pale with the dawning realization that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Davidson was on his radio calling for backup for ambulances for someone to tell him what to do next. Neither of them noticed the black SUVs that had appeared at the edge of the parking lot, engines running, but not yet moving. Neither of them noticed the drone that had positioned itself overhead, its cameras capturing everything in resolution clear enough to read the serial number on Mitchell's weapon. 40 seconds, 39, 38. Patricia from the bank had pushed through the crowd, dropping to her knees beside Eden, trying to pull the child away from her mother's body. But Eden wouldn't let go, her small fingers intertwined with Sarah's larger ones, holding on as if she could keep her mother's soul from leaving through sheer force of will. She said she was a colonel, someone in the crowd was saying. She showed them ID. They didn't care, another voice replied. They never care. Look at her uniform. Those are real medals. That's a Bronze Star. That's a Purple Heart. Jesus Christ, they shot a war hero. 20 seconds. 19, 18. Eden's phone, the one Sarah had given her for emergencies, the one with exactly 3 numbers programmed into it, began to ring. With trembling fingers, the little girl answered it, putting it on speaker because her hands were too covered in her mother's blood to hold it to her ear. Eden. The voice was deep, commanding, familiar. Uncle Danny, her mother's friend from the base, the one who sometimes came to dinner and made her laugh with funny voices. Uncle Danny, Eden sobbed. They shot Mommy. There's so much blood. She won't wake up. Eden listened to me very carefully. Do you see the black cars at the edge of the parking lot? The little girl looked up, nodding even though he couldn't see her. Yes. Those are my friends. In about 10 seconds they're going to come get you and Mommy. Don't be scared. You're safe now. But the police? The police can't hurt you anymore, sweetheart. We're handling it. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The black SUVs moved with the coordination of a military operation, because that's exactly what it was. They entered the parking lot in perfect formation, boxing in the scene. Doors opened, and soldiers emerged, not police, not SWAT, but United States Army Rangers in full combat gear. They moved with practiced precision, weapons raised but not aimed, creating a perimeter that suddenly made the local police look like children playing dress-up. One of them, a medic, was already running towards Sarah's prone form, medical kit in hand. "Stand down!" Mitchell shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a crime scene. You have no authority." He was cut off by the arrival of another vehicle, this one bearing the stars of a general officer. The man who emerged was in his 60s, African-American, with the kind of bearing that suggested he'd been in more combat zones than Mitchell had seen movies about. General Marcus Morrison, commander of United States Army Special Operations Command, looked at the scene before him, the blood pooling on the asphalt, the child clutching her mother's hand, the police officers who had caused it all, and his expression was something beyond rage, beyond grief. It was the look of a man watching his country betray itself. "Officer Mitchell," the general said, his voice carrying across the now silent parking lot. "You just shot one of the most decorated intelligence officers in the United States military. She had a security clearance so high that the president himself doesn't always know what she's working on. She's prevented more terrorist attacks than you've written parking tickets, and you shot her because you couldn't believe a black woman could be what she said she was." Mitchell's gun was shaking in his hand now. She was reaching for a weapon. She was reaching for her daughter. Morrison cut him off. "We have it all on satellite footage, every second, every word, every lie you told dispatch." The medic was working on Sarah now, his movements quick and professional. He looked up at Morrison and shook his head slightly. The general's jaw tightened. "Eden," Morrison said gently, kneeling beside the little girl. "Your mom asked us to take care of you. Will you come with me?" "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Eden asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Morrison looked at the child at her mother's still form at the blood that had already seeped too far across the hot asphalt. He'd delivered death notifications before, but never like this. Never to a 7-year-old whose mother had died wearing the uniform of the country that had failed to protect her. "We're going to do everything we can," he said, which wasn't a lie, but wasn't the truth either. More vehicles were arriving now. FBI, Department of Defense, Homeland Security. Each agency claiming jurisdiction, each trying to understand how a routine Thursday afternoon had become an incident that would be discussed in situation rooms from Washington to Brussels. Mitchell and Davidson were being separated, disarmed, pushed into different vehicles. Mitchell was still protesting, still insisting he'd followed protocol, still refusing to understand that he'd just created an international incident. Sarah Callahan wasn't just American military, she was NATO command. There would be calls from London, from Paris, from Berlin, all wanting to know how America had allowed one of their key strategic assets to be murdered by a racist cop in a parking lot. But none of that mattered to Eden, who was being gently lifted away from her mother's body by a female soldier who was whispering soft words in Spanish, the same language Sarah used to sing her to sleep. Eden still clutched Mr. Whiskers, the rabbit now permanently stained with her mother's blood, a teddy bear that would become evidence in a trial that would captivate the nation. As the helicopter landed in the parking lot, because when someone with Omega clearance goes down, normal rules cease to apply. Eden looked back one last time at where her mother lay. The medics had covered Sarah with a flag, the stars and stripes she'd served with distinction now serving as her shroud. "She was going to take me for ice cream," Eden whispered to no one in particular, the kind of detail that would break hearts when it was repeated in courtrooms and news reports. "Chocolate chip. She always let me get chocolate chip." The helicopter lifted off, carrying Eden away from the scene, away from her childhood, away from the last moment she'd ever feel truly safe in her own country. Below the investigation was beginning, the cover-up was already being discussed in certain circles, and the machinery of justice, slow grinding, often ineffective, was beginning to turn. But in that helicopter, Eden Callahan was just a 7-year-old girl who had watched her mother die, holding a blood-stained rabbit and her grandfather's military badge, wondering why the bad people her mother protected everyone from had turned out to be wearing police uniforms. The first news reports would hit the internet within the hour. Within 2 hours, #Justice for Sarah would be trending worldwide. Within 3, the president would be on the phone with General Morrison demanding answers. Within 4, protesters would surround the police station where Mitchell and Davidson were being held. But for now, in this moment, there was just the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air, carrying a little girl away from her mother's body, while below in the parking lot of the First National Bank of Fayetteville, Colonel Sarah Callahan's blood dried on the asphalt in the shape of sacrifice that America had demanded but never deserved. The helicopter touched down at Fort Bragg exactly 17 minutes after takeoff, though. For Eden, those minutes stretched like hours. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the parking lot. Her small body curled into the corner of the seat. Mr. Whiskers pressed against her chest like armor against a world that had suddenly revealed its teeth. The female soldier, Captain Maria Rodriguez, stayed close, but didn't push, understanding that some silences needed to be honored. General Morrison was waiting on the tarmac, his dress uniform somehow already bearing a black band across his badge. Behind him stood a small group of officers, their faces carved from stone, the kind of expressions soldiers wore when grief had to wait until after duty was done. "Eden," Morrison said gently, as Rodriguez carried the girl down from the helicopter. "There are some people here who need to ask questions, but first we're going to get you cleaned up, and I want my mommy." Eden interrupted, her voice small but fierce. "You said you'd do everything you could. Where is she?" Morrison's expression cracked for just a moment, the professional mask slipping to reveal the man underneath who had known Sarah Callahan for 15 years, who had promoted her twice, who had trusted her with secrets that could topple governments. Your mom is being taken care of, sweetheart. Right now, we need to take care of you. The base hospital had cleared an entire wing, not standard protocol for a single casualty. But nothing about this situation was standard. Eden was examined by 3 different doctors. Her face photographed where Mitchell's elbow had struck her, the bruise already purple against her brown skin. She didn't cry during the examination, didn't flinch when they cleaned the blood from her hands, her mother's blood that had already oxidized to the color of rust. While Eden was being examined, secure phone lines across the world were burning with encrypted conversations. In Brussels, NATO command was demanding answers. In London, MI6 was reviewing every operation Sarah had been involved in, checking if her death might have been something more than racist violence, though the satellite footage made that theory hard to support. In Washington, the president was on his 3rd cup of coffee, and his 5th advisor trying to understand how a routine police stop had become an international crisis. But the most important call came from a number that didn't exist in any directory, from a building that appeared on no maps. David Chen, call sign Uncle Danny, to Eden, was Sarah's handler at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was currently violating 17 different protocols by making this call on an unsecured line. "Marcus," he said when Morrison answered. "How's the girl?" "Traumatized, in shock, but physically okay, except for some bruising." "And Sarah?" The pause told David everything he needed to know. He'd seen the medical telemetry, knew what a point-blank shot to the torso meant, but hope was sometimes the last thing to die. "She coded twice in the helicopter," Morrison said finally. "They're trying, but..." "David, she lost too much blood. Even if they manage to stabilize her, the damage. She's not coming back from this." David's knuckles were white as he gripped the phone. Sarah Callahan had been more than an asset, more than a colleague. She'd been the kind of officer who made you believe in the mission, even when the mission seemed impossible. She'd been the one who stayed calm when an operation in Syria went sideways, who had personally extracted 2 CIA operatives from Tehran, who had somehow maintained her humanity despite seeing the worst of what humans could do to each other. The shooters. In custody. The one who pulled the trigger, Mitchell, is already lawyering up. Union rep, the whole 9 yards. They're going to claim it was justified, that she was reaching for her weapon. The satellite footage? Clear as day. She was reaching for her daughter. But you know how these things go. By the time it gets to trial, they'll have experts arguing about angles and perception and split-second decisions. David was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Marcus, Sarah's work. There are operations in motion that only she knew the full scope of. We need to, already on it. I've got a team going through her office now. But David, you know as well as I do that some of what she knew died with her. The Brussels connection, the Tehran assets, that situation in Singapore she was monitoring. We're flying blind on at least 3 critical operations." While the 2 men discussed the strategic implications of Sarah's death, Eden sat in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, still wearing her blood-stained clothes because no one had thought to bring her clean ones. Captain Rodriguez sat with her, not speaking, just present, in that way soldiers knew how to be when words were useless. The door opened and a woman entered, African-American, mid-40s, wearing a suit that suggested government, but not military. She had the kind of face that had seen too much, but hadn't let it harden her completely. "Eden, I'm Dr. Angela Foster. I'm here to help." "Are you a real doctor or a feelings doctor?" Eden asked the question so like something Sarah would have said that Rodriguez had to turn away to hide her reaction. "A feelings doctor," Angela admitted. "Is that okay?" Eden shrugged, a gesture that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders. "Mommy said feelings doctors help soldiers when bad things happen. She saw one after Baghdad." Angela settled into a chair, maintaining careful distance. "Your mom talked to you about her work. Not the secret stuff. Just that sometimes she had to go places where bad people were, and sometimes bad things happened. And that was why she couldn't always tell me where she was going or when she'd be back." "That must have been hard." Another shrug. "She always came back. Until today." The simplicity of it, the matter-of-fact acceptance from a 7-year-old, hit harder than tears would have. Angela had counseled hundreds of military families, had delivered news of deaths in combat. But this was different. This wasn't a soldier killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. This was a mother murdered in North Carolina by the very people who were supposed to protect and serve. Eden, do you understand what happened today? A police officer shot my mommy because he didn't believe she was really a colonel. The words came out flat, rehearsed, as if Eden had been repeating them to herself, trying to make sense of something senseless. That's right. And that was wrong. Very, very wrong. Will he go to jail? Angela hesitated. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that justice wasn't always just that a badge could be both shield and sword, protecting some while destroying others? That her mother's uniform, her service, her sacrifice might not be enough to guarantee that the man who killed her would face consequences. People are going to try very hard to make sure he's held responsible, she said finally, which was true even if it wasn't a yes. Eden looked at her with eyes too old for her face. That's not the same as jail. Before Angela could respond, the door burst open. General Morrison entered, his face grim. We have a situation. Eden, I need you to come with me right now. What's wrong? Rodriguez was already on her feet, hand instinctively moving to where her weapon would be if she'd been allowed to carry it in the hospital. The footage leaked. Someone we don't know who yet released the satellite surveillance of the shooting. It's everywhere. Every news channel, every social media platform, and... He paused, looking at Eden. Someone also leaked Sarah's service record. Her real one. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Sarah's real service record included operations that were supposed to remain classified for 50 years. It included missions that, if made public, could compromise ongoing operations, endanger assets, destabilize allied relationships. But it also included the truth of who Sarah Callahan really was. Not just a colonel, but a hero whose actions had saved thousands of lives. A strategic genius who had prevented World War III from starting in Eastern Europe through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance. A mother who had missed 7 of her daughter's birthdays because she was in places where America needed her most. Morrison's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his expression darkening further. They're outside. Who? Rodriguez asked. Everyone. Media protesters, military families. Someone leaked our location. They know Eden's here. Through the hospital window, they could already see the gathering crowd. News vans with satellite dishes. People carrying signs with Sarah's picture pulled from some database, showing her in full dress uniform, medals gleaming. Others held signs with Eden's name demanding justice for the girl who'd watched her mother die. We need to move her, Morrison said. This is about to become a circus, and she doesn't need to be in the middle of it. Where? Angela asked. Her father. Killed in action 3 years ago, Morrison said quietly. Afghanistan. Sarah was all Eden had. The weight of that settled over the room. Eden Callahan was now an orphan, her father dead in a war zone, her mother dead in a parking lot. Both killed while serving their country, one by an enemy combatant, one by a fellow American who couldn't see past the color of her skin. I have a secure location, David Chen said from the doorway. No one had heard him arrive, a skill that had served him well in his years with intelligence. It's not official, but it's safe, and it's away from all this. Morrison looked between David and Eden, calculating. David wasn't military, wasn't bound by the same protocols. He could move more freely, could protect Eden in ways the official system couldn't. Eden, David said, kneeling in front of the girl. Your mom asked me to take care of you if anything ever happened to her. I know this is scary and confusing, but I promise you, I'm going to keep you safe. Will you trust me? Eden looked at him. This man she'd known as Uncle Danny, who sometimes came to dinner and made her mother laugh, who taught her card tricks and told stories about places with funny names. Did Mommy really ask you that? David pulled out his phone, scrolled to a video. Sarah's face filled the screen, recorded in what looked like a hotel room wearing civilian clothes. Her voice came through the speakers warm and alive, and already a ghost. Eden, baby. If you're watching this, it means something happened to me. I know you're scared and sad and probably angry, and that's okay. All of those feelings are okay. Uncle Danny is going to take care of you now. He's one of the good guys, even if he cheats at cards sometimes. I need you to be brave, my little warrior. Remember what I taught you. We do what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I love you more than all the stars in the sky and all the fish in the sea. Forever and always, no matter what. The video ended. Eden stared at the blank screen for a moment, then looked up at David. She made that in Berlin, didn't she? I can see the TV tower in the window reflection. David blinked, surprised. Sarah had always said her daughter was unusually observant, but this was something else. Yes. How did you? Mommy taught me to always know where I am. She said situational awareness could save your life. Eden stood up, still clutching Mr. Whiskers. We should go now. The crowd is getting bigger and someone just threw a bottle at a police car. They all turned to look out the window. Eden was right. What had started as a gathering was becoming something else. The anger over Sarah's death was mixing with years of accumulated rage over police violence, over military families, ignored over promises broken and justice denied. Back exit, Morrison commanded. Rodriguez, you're with them. I'll handle things here. Try to control the narrative. They moved quickly through the hospital corridors, Eden between David and Rodriguez, looking small and lost despite her brave face. Behind them, they could hear the crowd growing louder, chanting Sarah's name, demanding justice, demanding answers that no one seemed able to provide. The vehicle David had arranged was unremarkable, a gray SUV that could have belonged to any suburban family. But Eden noticed the reinforced glass, the run-flat tires, the subtle modifications that suggested this car could withstand more than a normal commute. As they pulled away from the hospital, Eden turned for one last look. The crowd had swelled to hundreds, maybe thousands. Signs with her mother's face bobbed above the mass of people. Someone had started playing taps on a trumpet, the mournful notes carrying across the parking lot. They didn't even know her, Eden said quietly. Most of those people didn't know her at all. No, David agreed, navigating through back streets to avoid the growing demonstrations. But they know what she represents. A black woman who served her country with distinction and was killed for it. A mother shot in front of her child. A hero whose own nation failed to protect her. She wouldn't want riots, Eden said. She always said violence just makes more violence. Rodriguez reached over and squeezed Eden's shoulder gently. Your mom was a wise woman. She was a colonel, Eden corrected. And she had Omega clearance, which means she knew things that could stop wars or start them. She told me that once when she thought I was asleep. David and Rodriguez exchanged glances over Eden's head. The girl knew more than a 7-year-old should know, had heard more than Sarah probably realized. That knowledge would make her valuable to certain people, dangerous to others. The safe house was an hour away, a cabin in the woods that looked rustic, but was actually a CIA safe house that had been unofficially decommissioned. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, David had maintained it for situations exactly like this. As they drove, David's phone buzzed constantly with updates. The leaked footage had gone viral, viewed over 10 million times in the first hour. The president had called for an immediate investigation. The Attorney General was flying to North Carolina personally. NATO command had issued a statement calling Sarah's death a tragic loss for international security. But none of that would bring Sarah back. None of that would give Eden her mother back. Uncle Danny, Eden said suddenly, what happens to Mommy's work now? The secret thing she was doing. Other people will take over, David said carefully. But they won't know everything she knew. She had it all in her head, she said. The connections, the patterns. She could see things other people missed. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Eden was right, of course. Sarah had been running at least 3 operations that were so compartmentalized even he didn't know all the details. Her death had left gaps in America's intelligence network that might not be discovered until something went catastrophically wrong. "We'll figure it out," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure Eden or himself. The cabin appeared through the trees just as the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and fire. It was modest from the outside, just another vacation rental in the North Carolina woods. But Eden's sharp eyes caught the cameras hidden in the trees, the sensors disguised as garden decorations, the windows that were just a little too thick to be normal glass. "It's like the safe house in Prague," she said, and both adults froze. "How do you know about Prague?" David asked carefully. Eden shrugged. "Mommy talked in her sleep sometimes. After the nightmares, she'd say coordinates and building names and sometimes names of people. I remembered them all. She said I inherited her memory from Grandpa. He could remember every detail of every battle he ever fought in." David felt a chill run down his spine. If Eden had been listening to Sarah's sleep-talking for years, if she really had inherited Sarah's eidetic memory, then the child might be carrying more classified information in her head than some intelligence analysts learned in entire careers. They got Eden settled in a bedroom that had been hastily converted from an office. Rodriguez found some clothes in a storage closet that were too big, but clean. Eden changed mechanically, folding her blood-stained clothes carefully and placing them in a bag, evidence of the worst day of her life preserved like a terrible keepsake. While Eden showered David and Rodriguez talked in hushed tones in the kitchen. "She knows too much," Rodriguez said. "If the wrong people find out what she might have overheard—" "I know," David said. "But she's also a 7-year-old girl who just watched her mother die. We can't treat her like an intelligence asset." "Can't we?" "Because I guarantee you that's how others will see her. Foreign intelligence would pay millions for what might be in that child's head. And our own people. There are those who would want to debrief her, pick her brain for every detail she might have absorbed." David's phone rang before he could respond. The caller ID showed a number that made him straighten unconsciously. He answered on the second ring. "Sir?" "Chen, I'm watching the news. Is it as bad as it looks?" "Worse, sir. Callahan's dead. The child witnessed everything. And sir, the child knows things, classified things. She's been inadvertently collecting intelligence just by being around her mother." A pause. Then, "Protect the child, Chen. Whatever resources you need, you have them. And David. This comes from the highest level. That girl is not to be interrogated, debriefed, or questioned about what she might know. She's a child, not a source." "Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." "Good. And Chen, find out who leaked that footage and the service record. That wasn't random. Someone wanted this to blow up." The line went dead. David looked at Rodriguez. "We have our orders. Protect Eden at all costs." "From who? The media, foreign agents, our own people? The cops who might want to silence a witness?" "Yes," David said simply. Eden appeared in the doorway, drowning in an old t-shirt that hung to her knees. Mr. Whiskers still clutched in her arms. "I can't sleep," she said in a small voice. "Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. They all knew what she saw. Rodriguez moved first, gathering the child into her arms. "How about some hot chocolate? I think I saw some in the pantry." As Rodriguez led Eden to the kitchen, David's phone buzzed again. This time it was Morrison. "We have a problem," the general said without preamble. "Mitchell's lawyer is already on TV claiming self-defense. They're saying Sarah made threatening movements, that she was trained in combat and posed a lethal threat. That's insane. It's strategic. They're going to try to paint her as dangerous, unstable. They're already digging into her psych evaluations, looking for any PTSD diagnosis, any sign of mental health issues. They want to make this about a cop defending himself from a trained killer, not about race. David felt rage building in his chest. Even in death, they were trying to strip Sarah of her humanity, reduce her to a threat that needed to be eliminated. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Someone's leaked Eden's location. Not the safe house, thank God. But they know she's with you. Your name's about to be all over the news." David closed his eyes. His cover, 20 years of carefully constructed anonymity, was about to be blown. But looking at Eden in the kitchen, carefully sipping hot chocolate, with hands that still trembled slightly, he found he didn't care. "Let them come," he said. "David, she needs stability right now, Marcus. She needs to know someone's going to fight for her mother's memory. If that means my face on the news, so be it." After he hung up, David stood at the window watching the darkness settle over the forest. Somewhere out there, people were marching with Sarah's picture. Somewhere, lawyers were crafting narratives that would try to justify murder. Somewhere, intelligence networks were scrambling to fill the void left by one of their best operators. But here in this cabin that didn't officially exist, a 7-year-old girl was drinking hot chocolate and trying not to think about her mother's blood on her hands. Here, the global implications of Sarah Callahan's death shrunk to the size of one child's grief. "Uncle Danny," Eden called from the kitchen. "Captain Rodriguez says you knew my mom before I was born. Will you tell me stories about her, the ones from before when she was young?" David walked to the kitchen, pulling up a chair next to Eden. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Eden said. "I want to know everything, because if I know all the stories, if I remember everything, then she's not really gone, is she? She's still here in the stories." David looked at this remarkable child, her mother's daughter in every way that mattered, and began to speak. He told her about the young lieutenant he'd met 15 years ago, fresh out of West Point, who had looked at impossible missions and asked, "When do we start?" He told her about operations he probably shouldn't mention, but the classification levels seemed meaningless now. He told her about her mother's courage, her brilliance, her awful singing voice that she insisted on sharing during long surveillance operations. As he spoke, Eden listened with the same intensity her mother had brought to intelligence briefings, cataloging every detail, building a mental file of the mother she'd known and the soldier she'd only glimpsed. Outside, the world was coming apart over Sarah Callahan's death. Inside, 3 people who loved her in different ways were holding it together with stories and hot chocolate and the promise that tomorrow they would figure out what came next. The footage played again on the television in the corner, muted but endless. The moment of the shooting, Eden's scream, Sarah falling. It would play 1,000 times before the night was over, each viewing spreading the outrage further, each replay etching the injustice deeper into America's conscience. But Eden wasn't watching anymore. She was listening to stories about her mother holding Mr. Whiskers and pretending that the salt in the hot chocolate was from tears she wasn't crying. The stories continued deep into the night until Eden finally fell asleep on the couch, her head in Rodriguez's lap, still clutching Mr. Whiskers. David carried her to bed, noting how light she felt, how fragile this child who carried so much weight in her young mind. As he tucked her in, she stirred slightly, mumbling something about coordinates in Berlin that made his blood run cold. Even in sleep, her mother's secrets spilled from her lips. He returned to find Rodriguez standing at the window watching the darkness beyond the glass. "There's movement in the trees," she said quietly. 3 positions, maybe 4. They've been there for the last hour. David moved beside her, his trained eyes picking out the subtle signs she'd noticed. "Media, you think? Too professional, too patient. Media would have approached by now, knocked on the door, called out questions." She checked her weapon, a smooth, practiced motion. "These are watchers. The question is, who's—" Before David could answer, his secure phone rang. The display showed an incoming call from Langley from a department that technically didn't exist. He answered with just his identification number. "We have a situation," the voice said without preamble. "The Russians know about the child. They know what she might know." David's grip tightened on the phone. "How does it matter?" They've already inserted a team. Our assets in Moscow report that they're particularly interested in what Sarah might have told her daughter about Operation Blackwater. Operation Blackwater. The word sent ice through David's veins. It was an operation so classified that even its code name was compartmentalized. Sarah had been one of only 3 people who knew the full scope, and if Eden had overheard even fragments of it. "We need to move her," David said. "Negative. Moving her now would confirm she's valuable. Stay put. A team is en route. ETA 40 minutes. The line went dead. David looked at Rodriguez. "Company's coming. Ours, but we've got unknowns in the woods who might not wait that long." Rodriguez was already moving, checking windows, identifying defensive positions. "We need to wake Eden." "No," David said firmly. "Let her sleep. She's been through enough. We handle this." But even as he said it, he heard footsteps on the porch, deliberate and unafraid. A knock came polite but insistent. David approached the door, weapon drawn, but held low, Rodriguez covering him from an angle that would give her a clear shot if needed. "Mr. Chen." The voice was female-accented, British but with something else underneath. "My name is Catherine Walsh. I worked with Sarah in Brussels. I'm here to help." David knew that name. Catherine Walsh, MI6, had been Sarah's liaison on several joint operations, but that didn't mean the woman at the door was really her. "Prove it," he called through the door. There was a pause then. Prague winter of 2019. "Sarah saved my life when the Russians compromised our safe house. She shot 2 operatives while carrying me out with a bullet in her shoulder. She made me promise to look after Eden if anything happened to her. I'm here to keep that promise." David exchanged glances with Rodriguez. The details were correct, but in their world, correct details could be extracted through torture or surveillance. Still, they were outnumbered, and if this really was Catherine Walsh, they could use the help. He opened the door, keeping his weapon ready. The woman who stood there was exactly as Sarah had described her mid-40s auburn hair, green eyes that missed nothing, and a way of standing that suggested she was equally comfortable in a boardroom or a firefight. "Hello, David," she said, and there was genuine grief in her voice. "I came as soon as I heard. Where is she?" "Eden's sleeping." "Good. She'll need her strength for what's coming." Catherine stepped inside, her movements careful and non-threatening. "We have a problem. The shooting, the leaked footage, Sarah's service record going public, it's all connected. Someone wanted Sarah dead, and they wanted it public." "That's insane," Rodriguez said. "The cops who shot her were just racist idiots." "Were they?" Catherine pulled out a tablet showing them a series of documents. "Officer Derek Mitchell. 3 complaints of excessive force against black suspects, all buried. 2 connections to white supremacist groups through social media. And here's the interesting part, he requested that specific patrol route. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that bank." David studied the information, his mind making connections. Someone pointed him at Sarah. Someone who knew she'd be there, knew she'd be in uniform, knew exactly how Mitchell would react to a black woman claiming to be a colonel. Catherine's expression was grim. Sarah wasn't killed by random racism. She was assassinated using racism as a weapon. The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had weaponized America's own divisions, turned a racist cop into an unwitting assassin. But who? And why now? A sound from the bedroom made them all freeze. Eden stood in the doorway, Mr. Whiskers in one hand, her mother's phone in the other. "There are 17 text messages on Mom's phone," she said, her voice eerily calm. "They're all in code. The same code she used when she talked in her sleep. I can read them." David moved quickly, gently, taking the phone from Eden's hand. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't—" "They're about something called Kingfisher," Eden continued. "Mom was supposed to meet someone tomorrow, someone named Volkov." Catherine went very still. "Volkov, Dmitry Volkov." Eden nodded. "The messages say he has information about a leak in the Pentagon. Someone's been selling secrets to the Chinese. Mom was going to find out who. The three adults looked at each other, the full picture starting to emerge. Sarah hadn't just been eliminated. She'd been stopped from exposing a traitor. And whoever had arranged her death had done it in a way that would look like another incident of police violence, lost in the statistics of American tragedy. Eden. David said carefully, "What else do you remember from your mom's sleep-talking?" The girl's eyes were too old, too knowing. "Everything. I remember everything. Names, dates, operations coordinates. Mom said I had a gift for patterns like Grandpa. She didn't know I was collecting her nightmares." Before anyone could respond, Rodriguez's phone buzzed with an alert. She checked it, her face paling. "We need to turn on the news." The television flickered to life, showing a breaking news banner. Officer Derek Mitchell was being interviewed on a conservative news channel, his lawyer beside him, spinning a narrative that turned David's stomach. "I feared for my life," Mitchell was saying, his expression coached into something resembling remorse. "She was reaching for a weapon. She was trained in combat. I had to make a split-second decision to protect myself and my partner." The host, a blonde woman with perfectly styled hair and empty eyes, nodded sympathetically. "And now you're receiving death threats." "My family is in hiding," Mitchell said. "We're victims too. This rush to judgment, this mob mentality, it's not justice, it's revenge." Eden watched with an expression that belonged on someone much older. "He's lying," she said simply. "Mom never reached for her gun. She was reaching for me." Catherine knelt beside the child. "We know, darling, and we're going to prove it." "How?" Eden asked. "He's white. He's a cop. Mom always said the system protects people like him." The brutal honesty of it. The awareness that a 7-year-old black girl already understood the inequalities that had killed her mother hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. "Your mom was right about a lot of things," David said. "But she also believed in fighting for what's right even when the system is against you. Especially then." A crash from outside cut off any response. Rodriguez was at the window, instantly, weapon raised. "We've got movement. Multiple contacts approaching fast." David grabbed Eden, pulling her away from the windows. Catherine had produced a weapon from somewhere, a compact pistol that she handled with easy familiarity. "How many?" David asked. 6, maybe 7. Professional approach pattern. This isn't law enforcement." The lights cut out suddenly, plunging the cabin into darkness. Eden whimpered, the first truly childlike sound she'd made since arriving. David held her tighter, feeling her small body tremble against his. "Emergency protocols," he said quietly. "Rodriguez, take Eden to the panic room. Catherine, you're with me." "No." Eden's voice was fierce in the darkness. "I'm not hiding. Mom wouldn't hide." "Your mom would want you safe," David said firmly. "My mom would want me to remember everything I see," Eden shot back. "If something happens, I need to witness it. I need to remember it. For her." There wasn't time to argue. The front door exploded inward, and tactical lights flooded the room. David shoved Eden behind the couch, returning fire at the shapes pouring through the doorway. Rodriguez was shooting from the kitchen, her aim deadly accurate. Catherine had somehow flanked to the stairs, catching the intruders in a crossfire. The firefight was brief but intense. When the smoke cleared, 4 men in tactical gear lay on the floor, unconscious or dead. But there had been more outside, and now they could hear vehicles approaching, lots of them. "Exfil now," David commanded, grabbing Eden and heading for the back door. But as they reached it, more lights blazed to life outside. They were surrounded. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "David Chen, this is the FBI. We have the building surrounded. Come out with the child, unarmed hands visible." "Since when does the FBI announce themselves after the shooting starts?" Rodriguez muttered. David's secure phone rang. He answered it one-handed, still holding Eden with the other. "It's Morrison." The general's voice was urgent. "Those aren't FBI. We intercepted communications. It's a private military contractor hired by someone very high up. Someone who doesn't want Eden talking about what she knows." "How high up?" High enough that the real FBI is 20 minutes out coming to stop them. Hold your position. Cavalry's coming. 20 minutes. It might as well have been 20 hours. David looked at Eden, at her brave, terrified face, and made a decision. Eden, remember everything you're about to see, he said. Remember it all, and one day when you're older, you'll understand what your mother was really fighting against. He set her down behind heavy cover, then looked at Rodriguez and Catherine. We hold this position. No one gets to the child. What followed was the longest 20 minutes of Eden's life. The fake FBI tried to breach 3 more times. Each time David Rodriguez and Catherine fought them off, but ammunition was running low, and the attackers were getting smarter, more coordinated. Eden watched it all with those 2 old eyes, memorizing faces glimpsed in muzzle flashes, cataloging tactical movements, filing away everything, just as her mother had inadvertently taught her. She saw David take a bullet in the shoulder and keep fighting. She saw Rodriguez fashion an explosive from household chemicals that drove back an entire assault team. She saw Catherine speaking rapidly into a phone, in what sounded like Russian, calling in favors from people who owed Sarah Callahan their lives. And then, just when it seemed like they would be overrun, the real cavalry arrived. Not just FBI, but military helicopters, Army Rangers fast roping onto the property, establishing a perimeter with ruthless efficiency. The fake FBI scattered some, surrendering others trying to flee into the woods where they were quickly run down. General Morrison himself stepped through the ruined doorway, his expression murderous. Is the child safe? I'm not a child, Eden said, stepping out from cover. I'm Colonel Sarah Callahan's daughter, and I have information vital to national security. Morrison looked at this 7-year-old girl, standing amid the wreckage of a firefight, blood on her clothes again. This time David's, from when she'd helped bandage his shoulder, and he saw Sarah's iron will reborn. Yes, he said simply. You are and you do. The cleanup took hours. The men who'd attacked were indeed private military contractors, hired through so many shell companies, it would take weeks to trace the source. But Eden had seen one of them before, she said. He'd been in a photo on her mother's desk, a group shot from a Pentagon meeting. Mom called him the Snake, Eden said, pointing to a man being loaded into an ambulance. She said he smiled too much for someone who'd never seen combat. The detail was noted, filed, added to an investigation that was growing by the hour. But the immediate problem was Eden herself. She was now a confirmed target, a child who knew too much, who'd seen too much, who'd inherited her mother's burden without asking for it. She needs to disappear, Morrison said. Witness protection, new identity, the whole thing. No, Eden said, and there was such finality in her voice that everyone stopped to look at her. Mom died wearing her uniform, using her real name. I won't hide. I won't let them erase us. Eden, David started, but she cut him off. I know things about Kingfisher, about Volkov, about the Pentagon leak. Mom was going to stop it. Now I have to. You're 7 years old, Catherine said gently. I'll be 8 next month, Eden replied. And I'll be 9 after that, and 10, and one day I'll be old enough to finish what Mom started. But only if I stay visible, only if they know I'm watching, only if they know I remember. Morrison looked at David, who shrugged with his good shoulder. She's Sarah's daughter. You really think we could make her hide even if we tried? The general was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. We protect her then. Full detail round the clock. She stays visible but safe. There's something else, Eden said. She'd been clutching something in her hand throughout the fight, and now she held it out. It was a flash drive, small and unremarkable. Mom gave this to me last week. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone I trust. She said it was insurance. David took the drive carefully, as if it might explode. Did she say what was on it? Evidence, Eden said. Evidence of all the bad things she'd found. Evidence that would, and I quote, burn down half of Washington if it ever came to light. The adults exchanged glances. Sarah Callahan, even in death, was still fighting. She'd known she was in danger, had prepared for it, had trusted her 7-year-old daughter with what might be the most explosive intelligence leak in American history. "We need to get her somewhere safe," Morrison said. "Somewhere we can figure out what's on that drive and what to do with it." "Fort Bragg," Eden said. "Mom's office. She said it was the safest place in the world because it was where America kept its promises." Morrison almost smiled at that. "Your mother was an optimist." "No," Eden corrected. "She was a soldier. She believed in what America could be, not always what it was." As they prepared to leave, Eden walked back into the cabin one last time. She retrieved Mr. Whiskers from where he'd fallen during the fight, the rabbit now bearing new stains from the night's violence. She also picked up her mother's phone, which had somehow survived intact. "There's one more message," she said, showing it to David. "It came through during the shooting." The message was simple. "The eagle has fallen. The nest is unguarded. Kingfisher flies at dawn." David's face went white. "That's a go code. Whatever Volkov was planning, Sarah's death triggered it." "When's dawn?" Rodriguez asked, checking her watch. 3 hours, David said. "We have 3 hours to figure out what Kingfisher is and stop it." Eden looked at the adults around her, these warriors who'd fought to protect her, who'd bled for her, who now looked to her for answers she shouldn't have to give. "Mom talked about Kingfisher in her sleep," she said. "It's not a what, it's a who. Kingfisher is someone in the White House, someone close to the president, someone who's about to sell out every American intelligence asset in China." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If Eden was right, if her mother's nightmares held truth, then in 3 hours, dozens of American agents would be exposed, arrested, probably executed. Sarah's death hadn't just been about silencing her. It had been about clearing the way for the largest intelligence breach in American history. "We need to move," Morrison commanded. "Now." As they loaded into military vehicles, Eden clutched Mr. Whiskers and her mother's phone, twin talismans of a childhood that had ended in a bank parking lot. Behind them, the safe house burned, set ablaze by someone trying to destroy evidence. The fire reflected in Eden's eyes as she watched it consume the last place she'd felt safe. "They killed her for nothing," she said quietly. "Mom would have found another way to stop them. She always did." "Not for nothing," David said, putting his good arm around her. "They killed her because she was close, because she was about to expose them, and they failed because she made sure you knew everything you needed to know." Eden was quiet for a moment then. "Do you think she knew that she was going to die?" David thought about the video message Sarah had left about the flash drive, about all the classified information she'd inadvertently passed to her daughter through years of nightmare-fueled sleep-talking. "I think she knew she was in danger, and I think she trusted you to be strong enough to handle whatever came next." "I'm 7, Eden said, and for just a moment she sounded like the child she should have been allowed to be. "Your mother was 17 when she joined the army," Catherine said from the front seat. "She lied about her age, forged her parents' signatures. The recruiting officer knew, but he let her in anyway. You know what he told her?" Eden shook her head. "He told her that sometimes the world needs warriors who aren't old enough to know what's impossible, that youth can be its own kind of wisdom." Catherine turned to look at Eden. "You're 7, and you're also the daughter of Sarah Callahan. Both things can be true." The convoy raced through the night toward Fort Bragg, toward Sarah's office, and whatever secrets it held. In 3 hours, Kingfisher would fly, and American intelligence would either triumph or collapse. The weight of it all rested on the shoulders of a 7-year-old girl with an eidetic memory and a teddy bear named Mr. Whiskers. But Eden Callahan was her mother's daughter. And as the miles flew by, as dawn approached with its promise of revelation or disaster, she held tight to her mother's last gifts: knowledge, purpose, and the unshakable belief that one person, no matter how small, could stand against injustice and win. The convoy screamed through the pre-dawn darkness toward Fort Bragg, every minute counting down toward catastrophe. Eden sat between David and Rodriguez, her mother's phone clutched in one hand, while she scrolled through encrypted messages with the other, her young mind decoding patterns that had taken Sarah years to understand. "There," she said suddenly, pointing at a seemingly random string of numbers. "Mom used this same sequence when she had nightmares about Beijing. These are coordinates. Kingfisher is meeting someone at these coordinates in..." She did quick mental math. 2 hours and 43 minutes. Morrison, who was coordinating with Washington from the front vehicle via secure satellite phone, immediately relayed the information. The response was swift and troubling. "Those coordinates are for a private airfield outside Durham," Morrison reported back. "It's owned by a shell company that traces back to Chinese intelligence. We're mobilizing units now, but Eden, we need to know who Kingfisher is. Without that, we're shooting in the dark." Eden closed her eyes, sifting through years of overheard conversations, mumbled names in the darkness, her mother's voice thick with worry or rage. She called him the Patriot once sarcastically, said he wore his flag pin while selling secrets, said he had the president's ear and China's money. "That could be 50 people in Washington," Catherine said grimly. "No," Eden said, her eyes snapping open. "Mom drew a bird once when she was on the phone, a kingfisher. But she gave it human eyes and she wrote something under it." She grabbed a piece of paper and sketched quickly, her hand moving with inherited precision. "These eyes, one blue, one green. Heterochromia." David's intake of breath was sharp. "Jesus Christ. It's Brennan. Deputy National Security Advisor Thomas Brennan. He has heterochromia." The car swerved slightly as Morrison processed this information. Thomas Brennan had been in his position for 3 years, had top-level clearance, attended every significant intelligence briefing. If he was Kingfisher, the damage he could have done, the damage he was about to do, was incalculable. "We need proof," Morrison said. "Eden's memories won't hold up in court, won't be enough to arrest the Deputy National Security Advisor." "The flash drive," Eden said quietly. "Mom's insurance. She knew it was Brennan. She had to have proof." They reached Fort Bragg's gates at 0430 hours, the guards waving them through after seeing Morrison's face. Sarah's office was in a building that didn't appear on any public maps 3 floors underground, protected by biometric scanners and armed guards who stood a little straighter when they recognized Eden. "Colonel Callahan's daughter," one of them said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss, miss. Your mother was... she was the best of us." Eden nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. These men had known her mother had protected her. Secrets had trusted her with their lives on missions they could never discuss. Now they looked at Eden with the same respect, the same recognition of something greater than rank or age. Sarah's office was exactly as she'd left it 4 days ago, before what was supposed to be a routine trip to the bank. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. A coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" sat empty beside the computer, and photos covered one wall. Eden at various ages, Sarah's parents, her late husband in his dress uniform, and dozens of group shots from operations around the world. "The computer will be encrypted 6 ways from Sunday," David said, but Eden was already at the keyboard typing. "My birthday backwards, then Dad's death date, then the coordinates of where they got married," she said, fingers flying. Mom thought she was being clever, but she used the same pattern for everything important. The computer unlocked, and immediately dozens of files appeared. Eden plugged in the flash drive, and more files cascaded across the screen. Documents, recordings, surveillance photos, financial records. Sarah Callahan had built a case that would have made prosecutors weep with joy. "Here," Eden said, clicking on an audio file labeled with yesterday's date. Her mother's voice filled the room. "If you're listening to this, it means I'm dead, and Eden gave you the drive. By now you know about Kingfisher. Thomas Brennan has been selling intelligence to China for 3 years. Every dead asset, every blown operation, every leak that we couldn't explain at all traces back to him. I have financial records showing payments totaling $30 million, recordings of him discussing classified operations with Chinese handlers, and photographs of him meeting with known MSS operatives. Sarah's voice paused, and when it continued, it was softer, sadder. I was supposed to meet Dmitry Volkov tomorrow. He was going to give me the final peace documentation of Brennan's next sale. It's not just names this time. It's the entire NOC list for East Asia. Every non-official cover operative we have from Tokyo to Jakarta. Hundreds of lives. Brennan is supposed to deliver it at dawn on Friday. If I'm dead, you have maybe hours to stop him. Another pause. Eden baby. If you're listening to this and knowing you probably are, because you got Dad's stubborn streak and my inability to let things go, I need you to know that none of this is your responsibility. You're 7 years old. You should be worried about school and friends and what's for dinner, not international espionage. But I also know you won't listen to that any more than I would have. So remember what I taught you. We do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I love you, my little warrior. Forever and always. The recording ended. The room was silent except for Eden's quiet sniffles. Rodriguez put a hand on the girl's shoulder, but Eden shrugged it off steel, returning to her spine. We have 90 minutes, she said. Mom gave us everything we need. Now we finish it. Morrison was already on the phone with the Pentagon, the FBI, the CIA, everyone who needed to know that the Deputy National Security Advisor was a traitor. But bureaucracy moved slowly even in crisis. Arrests at that level required approvals, warrants, political considerations. They're debating jurisdiction, Morrison said, frustration clear in his voice. The Attorney General wants to be sure. The President wants to be briefed. Meanwhile, Brennan's probably already on his way to that airfield. Then we stop him ourselves, Eden said, and everyone turned to look at her. Mom would have. She wouldn't have waited for permission while people's lives were at stake. Eden? David started, but she was already pulling up another file on the computer. Look, Mom tracked Brennan's movements for months. Every Friday morning he jogs the same route. He'll pass within 2 miles of that airfield. He's going to jog there, make the delivery during his run when no one would question why he's out of contact, then jog back. He's probably already left his house. Catherine studied the map Eden had pulled up. She's right, and if we move now, we can intercept him before he reaches the airfield. That's not how this works, Morrison said. We can't just grab the Deputy National Security Advisor off his morning jog. Why not? Eden asked, and the innocence of the question, the childlike inability to understand why bureaucracy should trump justice, cut through the room. He killed my mom. Maybe not with his own hands, but he pointed Derek Mitchell at her like a weapon. He knew what would happen. And now he's about to get hundreds of people killed. Why can't we stop him? Morrison looked at this child, who had lost everything, who had inherited a burden no 7-year-old should carry, who was asking the kind of questions that adults had learned not to ask. He thought about Sarah, about the oath they'd both taken, about the people whose lives hung in the balance. You're right, he said finally. Sarah would have acted, so we act. The plan they cobbled together in the next 15 minutes would have made Sarah proud in its simplicity and audacity. They would intercept Brennan on his jog Rodriguez, and David would take him down, and they would recover whatever he was planning to deliver to the Chinese. It was illegal, it would probably end their careers, but hundreds of lives were worth more than their pensions. They moved out in unmarked vehicles, Eden insisting on coming despite everyone's protests. I need to see his face, she said. I need to see the man who killed my mother. The intercept point was a wooded section of Brennan's jogging trail hidden from the road and any potential witnesses. They positioned themselves and waited. Eden sat in one of the vehicles with Catherine watching through binoculars as the sun began to creep over the horizon. There, Catherine said, spotting the figure approaching. Thomas Brennan, Deputy National Security Advisor, traitor and murderer by proxy. Jogging along like it was any other morning. What happened next was swift and professional. Rodriguez stepped out from cover, David flanking from the other side. Brennan saw them try to run, but David had already anticipated his route. The takedown was quick, efficient, and Brennan hit the ground hard. "What the hell?" he gasped, his different-colored eyes wide with shock. "Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, Kingfisher," Morrison said, emerging from the trees. "And it's over." Brennan's face went through several expressions: shock, fear, and finally a kind of resigned cunning. "You have no authority. This is kidnapping. I'll have you all court-martialed." "Maybe," Morrison agreed. "But first, you're going to give us the list you were about to sell to the Chinese." "I don't know what you're talking about." Eden stepped out of the vehicle then, and Brennan's face went white. He recognized her, of course. Sarah's daughter. The child from the footage that had been playing on every news channel for the past day. "You killed my mother," Eden said, her voice steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "You knew Officer Mitchell would shoot her if he saw her at that bank. You made sure he'd be there. You killed her because she was going to stop you." "You can't prove any of that," Brennan said, but his voice was shaking now. Eden held up a small device, one of her mother's recorders. "Mom taught me to always document everything." She pressed play, and Brennan's own voice filled the air from a recording Sarah had made weeks ago. "The colonel is getting too close. Callahan needs to be handled. No, not like that. It needs to look random, natural. We have that asset in the police department, don't we? The one with the racial issues? Perfect. Make sure their paths cross. Let his prejudices do our work for us." The recording ended. Brennan's face had gone from white to gray. That's fabricated. Deep fake. It won't hold up in court." "Maybe not," Eden said. "But this will." She held up a flash drive pulled from Brennan's pocket during the takedown. "The NOC list. You were going to trade their lives for money. People who trusted you, who served their country, who have families. People like my mom." Brennan lunged suddenly, not for the flash drive, but for Eden herself, his hands reaching for her throat. He never made it. Rodriguez's fist caught him in the solar plexus, dropping him to his knees. David zip-tied his hands while he gasped for breath. "She was just supposed to be discredited," Brennan wheezed. "Unstable black woman attacks police, justifiable shooting." No one was supposed to dig deeper. But the kid, the damn kid, had to be there. Had to be recording, had to make her a martyr. "My mother was a hero," Eden said quietly. "And you're nothing but a traitor who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, remembering that a 7-year-old girl brought you down." The sirens were approaching now, the real FBI. This time the cavalry Morrison had finally convinced to act. They would take Brennan, would process the evidence, would begin the long work of undoing the damage he'd done. But Eden wasn't done. She walked closer to Brennan, close enough that he could see the fury in her young eyes. "My mother died protecting this country from people like you. She died in her uniform, with honor, with dignity. You're going to die in a prison cell, alone and forgotten, knowing that everything you sold your soul for was taken away by the daughter of the woman you murdered." "Eden," David said gently, "that's enough." But Eden shook her head. "No, he needs to know." She looked back at Brennan. "The recording of you ordering my mother's death, I've already sent it to every news outlet in the country. By tonight, everyone will know what you did. Your family, your friends, your children, they'll all know you're not just a traitor, but a murderer. Mom always said the truth was the most powerful weapon. She was right." The FBI vehicles screeched to a halt, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. Special Agent Harrison, whom Morrison had been coordinating with, approached carefully. "General Morrison, we'll take custody of Brennan now." "He has the NOC list on him," Morrison said, handing over the flash drive. "And we have extensive documentation of his treason. Colonel Callahan compiled it all before her death." As they loaded Brennan into a vehicle, he looked back at Eden one more time. "Your mother would have done the same thing in my position. We all make compromises in this business." Eden's response was immediate and fierce. My mother never compromised on what mattered. She never sold out her country or her people. She died clean with honor. You'll die a traitor. That's the difference between you." The convoy pulled away, taking Brennan to a fate that would indeed involve a prison cell and a legacy of shame. But Eden wasn't watching anymore. She had walked over to a tree and sat down beneath it, suddenly looking every one of her 7 years. "I'm tired," she said softly. "I'm so tired." Rodriguez sat down beside her, pulling the girl against her side. "You did it, Pequena. You stopped him. Your mom would be so proud." "Would she?" Eden asked. "I feel empty. I thought catching him would make me feel better, would bring her back somehow. But she's still gone." "Grief's like that," Catherine said, joining them under the tree. "Justice doesn't cure it. Nothing does. You just learn to carry it." Eden pulled Mr. Whiskers from her pocket she'd insisted on bringing him and held the rabbit tight. "What happens now?" Morrison, who had been coordinating the aftermath on his phone, looked down at her. "Now we make sure Brennan pays for what he did. There'll be trials investigations. You'll have to testify, Eden. It won't be easy." And then... Morrison paused, considering. "Then we figure out how to give you the childhood your mother would have wanted for you." "She wanted me to be brave," Eden said. "To stand up for what's right. To protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She also wanted you to get ice cream and play with friends and be a kid," David reminded her gently. Eden was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I do both?" "Yeah," Rodriguez said, squeezing her tighter. "Yeah, Pequena, you can do both." The sun was fully up now, painting the world in shades of gold and green. Somewhere hundreds of American intelligence operatives were waking up to another day, not knowing how close they'd come to being exposed, arrested, possibly killed. They would never know that a 7-year-old girl had saved their lives by refusing to let her mother's murder go unanswered. The media explosion came within hours. Eden's recording of Brennan confessing to orchestrating Sarah's death dominated every news cycle. The phrase, "killed her because she was going to stop you," became a rallying cry. Protests that had been about police violence expanded to encompass corruption at the highest levels of government. The president held an emergency press conference promising full investigations, complete transparency, justice for Colonel Callahan and her daughter. But Eden wasn't watching any of it. She was in Sarah's office at Fort Bragg, going through her mother's things with David and Rodriguez. She found letters Sarah had written but never sent, including one to Eden for her 18th birthday, another for her wedding day, another for when she became a mother herself. Sarah had known the dangers of her work, had prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't be there for these milestones. "My dearest Eden." The 18th birthday letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to see you grow up. I want you to know that every decision I made, every risk I took, was to make the world safer for you. But I also want you to know that you don't have to follow in my footsteps. You don't owe the world your service just because I gave mine. Live your life, baby girl. Fall in love, make mistakes, eat too much ice cream, dance badly to good music. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you." Eden traced her fingers over her mother's handwriting, memorizing every loop and curve. "She knew," she said quietly. "She knew she might not make it." "She was a soldier," Morrison said. "We all know the risks." "But she was also a mom," Eden countered. "And she chose being a soldier anyway." "She chose both," Catherine corrected. "She was fully both, never compromising either. That's what made her extraordinary." A knock at the door interrupted them. An aide entered looking nervous. "General Morrison, sir. The president is on line 1. He wants to speak to Miss Callahan." Everyone looked at Eden, who suddenly seemed very small in her mother's chair. "The president wants to talk to me." Morrison handed her the phone. "He wants to thank you, I imagine." Eden took the phone with trembling hands. "Hello." The president's voice was warm but formal. "Miss Callahan." I wanted to personally thank you for your bravery in exposing Deputy Advisor Brennan's treason. Your mother was a true American hero, and you've proven yourself worthy of her legacy." "Thank you, sir," Eden said, then added with a child's directness. "Are you going to make sure Officer Mitchell goes to jail for killing her?" There was a pause. "The justice system will determine Officer Mitchell's fate, Eden. But I promise you, we're doing everything in our power to ensure justice is served." "That's not a yes," Eden observed. Another pause longer this time. "You're right, it's not. The system is complicated, Eden, but we're going to try to make it better. Your mother's sacrifice won't be in vain." "My mother's sacrifice shouldn't have been necessary," Eden said, and there was such pain in her voice that everyone in the room had to look away. "She survived Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and a dozen other places you probably can't even tell me about. She survived actual enemies of America. But she couldn't survive a traffic stop in North Carolina. How do you make that better, Mr. President?" The president had no answer for that. How could he? How could anyone explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes the greatest dangers came from within, that the uniform her mother wore with such pride could also be a target, that serving your country didn't mean your country would serve you back? After Eden hung up, she sat quietly for a moment, then looked at the adults around her. "I want to release everything," she said. "All of Mom's files. Everything she found about corruption, about racism in the military and police, about people like Brennan who sell out their country. She gathered it all for a reason." "That would be complicated," Morrison said carefully. "Some of that information is classified. Some of it could damage ongoing operations. Some of it could save lives," Eden countered. "Mom always said sunlight was the best disinfectant. She said secrets were where corruption grew." They debated it for hours, the child arguing with the wisdom of someone far older, while the adults struggled with the implications of what she was suggesting. In the end, a compromise was reached. The information would be released selectively, carefully, through proper channels, but with Eden's oversight. She would become, at 7 years old, the youngest consultant in CIA history, though that detail would remain classified. As the day wore on, Eden found herself back in the parking lot where her mother had died. Someone had created a memorial, flowers, flags, photos of Sarah in uniform, messages of love and loss and rage. Eden knelt among the offerings, Mr. Whiskers in her arms, and finally let herself cry properly. Not the shocked tears of trauma or the angry tears of confrontation, but the deep grieving tears of a child who had lost her mother. People began to gather, soldiers from Fort Bragg, civilians from the community, families who had lost loved ones to violence, veterans who had served with Sarah. They formed a protective circle around Eden, not speaking, just present, honoring both the woman who had died and the child who had to live with that loss. "She was the best of us," someone said quietly. "She deserved better," another voice added. "They both did," a third concluded. As the sun set on what had been the longest day of Eden's life, she stood up, still holding Mr. Whiskers, and faced the crowd. She thought about speaking, about saying something profound or healing. But she was 7 years old, and she was tired, and she missed her mother with an ache that felt like it would never go away. "My mom was supposed to take me for ice cream," she said finally, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Chocolate chip. She always let me get chocolate chip even though she preferred vanilla. She said life was too short not to get the flavor you really wanted." It wasn't a speech about justice or patriotism or sacrifice. It was just a daughter missing her mother, remembering the small kindnesses that made up a life. But somehow, that simple truth hit harder than any rhetoric could have. "Would you like to get ice cream now?" Rodriguez asked gently. "I think I saw a place down the street." Eden looked at the woman who had fought to protect her, who had bled for her, who was offering this small comfort in an ocean of loss. "Chocolate chip. Whatever flavor you want, Pequena." As they walked away from the memorial, Eden looked back one more time. The crowd was dispersing, but the offerings remained a testament to Sarah Callahan's life and death. Tomorrow, the investigations would continue. The trials would begin. The slow work of justice would grind forward. But tonight, a 7-year-old girl would eat chocolate chip ice cream and try to remember what her mother's laugh sounded like. She would hold tight to Mr. Whiskers and to the knowledge that she had stopped the man responsible for her mother's death. It wasn't enough, nothing would ever be enough, but it was something. And sometimes Eden was learning something was all you could do. You stood up to injustice. You protected those who needed protecting. You honored the dead by fighting for the living. And when it all became too much, you ate chocolate chip ice cream and remembered that even in the darkest moments, someone who loved you had wanted you to have the flavor you really wanted. The ice cream shop was nearly empty at that hour, just the owner and a teenage employee who recognized Eden from the news coverage that had been running non-stop. The girl behind the counter started to say something, perhaps condolences or questions, but the owner, an older black woman with knowing eyes, silently shook her head. "What can I get you, sweetheart?" she asked Eden gently. "Chocolate chip, please. 2 scoops." Eden's voice was small but determined. "My mom always said 1 scoop was never enough for the really hard days." The woman nodded, preparing the cone with extra care, adding a few more chocolate chips than standard. When Rodriguez tried to pay, she waved the money away. "No charge. Some things we do because it's right." They sat at a corner booth, Eden mechanically eating her ice cream, while Rodriguez and David maintained quiet watch. The shop's television was on muted, but the images told the story clearly enough. Protests had erupted in 12 major cities. The hashtag Justice for Sarah had evolved into Justice for Them, all encompassing not just Sarah's death, but a litany of names, a roster of those who had served and been failed by the system they'd sworn to protect. "They're angry," Eden observed, watching demonstrators march past a police line. "They should be," Rodriguez said. "Your mother's death. It wasn't just about her. It was about every soldier who came home from war, only to find the war was here too." Eden's phone, her mother's phone really that she'd refused to let go of, buzzed with an incoming call. The number was international unfamiliar. David reached for it, but Eden had already answered. "Hello, little warrior." The voice was heavily accented Russian. "This is Dmitry Volkov. I was supposed to meet your mother today." David immediately tried to trace the call, while Rodriguez moved to the window checking for threats. But Eden seemed strangely calm. "You're the one who was going to give her proof about Brennan," she said. "Da, I have something else now, something your mother didn't know about. The shooting. It was not just Brennan's idea. There are others very high up who wanted her silenced. I can give you names, but not over phone. You understand?" "It's a trap," David mouthed, but Eden was already responding. "Where?" "Your mother spoke of place she felt safe. Church, where she married your father. 1 hour. Come alone." "She's 7 years old," David said loudly enough for Volkov to hear. "She's not going anywhere alone." "Then bring 1 guardian. But know this, what I have will change everything. Your mother, she saved my daughter once in Chechnya. This debt I must pay. 1 hour." The line went dead. David was already shaking his head, but Eden stood up, leaving her half-finished ice cream melting on the table. "We have to go," she said. "Absolutely not," David said. "This is clearly—" "Mom trusted him enough to arrange a meeting," Eden interrupted. "And he's right about the church. She never told anyone else about feeling safe there. She only told me." Rodriguez had her phone out already calling for backup, but Eden grabbed her hand. "If we bring an army, he won't show. And then we'll never know who else was involved in killing Mom." The debate that followed was fierce but brief. In the end, Eden's logic won. If there were others involved in Sarah's death, others still in positions of power they needed to know. David would go with Eden, while Rodriguez coordinated backup from a distance, ready to move in if anything went wrong. The church was small old, tucked away in a part of Fayetteville that had been forgotten by development. Eden had been here once before, when Sarah had brought her to lay flowers on their wedding anniversary. The building seemed to exhale history, its worn wooden pews holding the weight of countless prayers, promises, and partings. Volkov was already there, sitting in the back row. He was not what Eden had expected. Small, unremarkable, the kind of man who could disappear in any crowd. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and surprisingly sad when they landed on Eden. "You look like her," he said softly. "Same strength in the jaw, same fire in the eyes." "You said others were involved," Eden said, cutting straight to the point in a way that made Volkov smile slightly. "Americans always so direct." He pulled out an envelope thick with documents. "Your mother was investigating more than Brennan. She found network military contractors, Pentagon officials, even judges. All connected, all profiting from keeping certain wars going, certain conflicts unresolved. She called it the forever war machine." David took the envelope, scanning its contents quickly. His face grew increasingly grim. "These names. Jesus Christ, this goes all the way to people who make presidents," Volkov finished. "Your mother, she was going to expose them all. Not just Brennan selling secrets, but entire system that needs enemies to justify budgets, that creates conflicts to solve them, that sends soldiers to die for profit margins." Eden felt something cold settle in her stomach. So they all wanted her dead. No little warrior. They wanted her discredited, ruined, maybe imprisoned. But Brennan, he panicked. He turned discrediting into killing. Now they're all scrambling to cover tracks to distance themselves. But your mother, smart woman, she hid evidence everywhere. This is just what I found. "Why help us?" David asked suspiciously. Volkov stood his movement, careful, non-threatening. "In Grozny 2016, your mother extracted my daughter from a GRU black site. My daughter was FSB analyst who tried to blow whistle on war crimes. Sarah could have used her for intelligence, could have turned her into asset. Instead, she reunited us, got us new identities, gave us chance at life. I don't forget such debts." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's more. The officer who shot her, Mitchell, he wasn't randomly assigned to that patrol route. Someone in his department, someone with connections to this network, made sure he would be there. They knew his history, his prejudices. They used him like weapon." "Who?" Eden's voice was sharp with fresh anger. "Police Captain James Crawford. He's in those documents. He's been taking money from defense contractors for years, using his position to protect their interests, silence their critics." Volkov looked at Eden with something like pity. "Your mother was a brilliant woman, but she didn't see the full web until too late. They turned her own country's sickness against her." After Volkov left, melting back into the shadows, he'd emerged from Eden, sat in the church pew, where her parents had once exchanged vows. The weight of what she'd learned pressed down on her small shoulders. It wasn't just one racist cop and one traitor. It was a system, a network, a cancer that had metastasized through the institutions her mother had served. "What do we do?" she asked David. "We burn it all down," he said grimly. "Every name, every connection. We expose them all. Mom tried that. Look what happened to her." David knelt beside her, his face serious. "Your mom was one woman working in the shadows. But now the whole world is watching. They killed her in broad daylight in front of cameras in front of you. They can't make that go away. They can't spin it or classify it or bury it in bureaucracy. Your mother's death might be the match that finally lights the fire she was trying to start." They returned to Fort Bragg to find chaos. The documents Volkov had provided had been verified bank records, encrypted communications, photographs of clandestine meetings. The network Sarah had been uncovering was real, vast, and terrifying in its implications. Morrison was on 3 different phones, coordinating with agencies that suddenly found themselves investigating their own leadership. But the real explosion came from an unexpected source. Officer Derek Mitchell, sitting in federal custody, had seen the news coverage of Brennan's arrest. He'd heard Eden's recording of Brennan ordering Sarah's death, and something in him, guilt, self-preservation, or perhaps just the realization that he'd been used, had broken. He wants to make a deal, the federal prosecutor told Morrison. Full confession, complete cooperation in exchange for consideration at sentencing. He says Crawford gave him the patrol route, told him there had been reports of someone impersonating military personnel in that area. He says he was set up to be the murder weapon. Eden listened to this with an expression that belonged on someone much older. He still pulled the trigger, she said quietly. He still chose to shoot instead of making one phone call to verify who she was. Yes, the prosecutor agreed. And he'll still face justice for that. But his testimony could take down Crawford and anyone else involved in the conspiracy. The next few days blurred together in a haze of investigations, interviews, and revelations. Every thread pulled led to two more. The network Sarah had been investigating wasn't just about profit, it was about power, about maintaining a state of perpetual conflict that justified budgets, careers, and ideologies. They had turned patriotism into profit service, into sacrifice for stock prices. Eden found herself at the center of it all, the child whose mother's death had exposed the rot. She testified before Congress, her small voice carrying through the chamber, as she recounted not just the day of the shooting, but the years of classified information. She'd absorbed the patterns, she'd recognized the connections her eidetic memory had preserved. My mother believed in America, she told the assembled legislators. Not the America that killed her, but the America that could be. She used to say that patriotism meant loving your country enough to help it live up to its promises. She died trying to do that. The question now is whether you'll let her death mean something, or whether you'll let the system that killed her continue. The senator leading the hearing, a man who had served 3 tours in Vietnam, had tears on his weathered face. Miss Callahan, what would you have us do? Eden looked at him with her mother's eyes, fierce and uncompromising. Change, real change. Not commissions and investigations that go nowhere, but actual change. Every name in these documents should face justice. Every system that failed my mother should be reformed. Every soldier who serves this country should know that their country will serve them back. That's a tall order for a democracy, young lady. My mother completed impossible missions all the time, Eden replied. She used to say that impossible just meant it hadn't been done yet. The hearings continued for weeks. One by one, the names in Volkov's documents were called to account. Some resigned in disgrace. Others were arrested. Captain Crawford was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. His connection to Brennan and the defense contractors laid bare. But the real victory came in an unexpected form. The president, facing enormous public pressure, signed an executive order creating the Callahan Commission, a permanent oversight body tasked with investigating corruption between defense contractors, military leadership, and law enforcement. Eden was named as a special youth advisor, the youngest person ever to hold such a position. The day the order was signed, Eden stood in the Oval Office wearing a dress her mother had bought her for a special occasion that Sarah hadn't lived to see. The president handed her the pen he'd used to sign the order. "Your mother would be proud," he said. "My mother would be alive if this commission had existed earlier," Eden replied, and the president had no response to that truth. As the weeks turned to months, Eden found herself living a strange double life. Part of her time was spent in meetings with intelligence officials, her unique knowledge and perspective invaluable in unraveling the networks of corruption. But David Rodriguez and Morrison made sure she also had time to be a child, school friends, normal 7-year-old things, even if normal would never quite fit her again. Officer Mitchell's trial began in the fall. Eden attended every day, sitting in the front row, her presence a silent reminder of what his actions had cost. She watched him on the stand, watched him cry as he described the shooting, watched him claim he'd been manipulated, set up, used. "But you still shot her," the prosecutor pressed. "When she was reaching for her child, not a weapon. When she posed no threat. You shot her because you couldn't believe a black woman could be who she said she was. Mitchell's answer, when it came, was barely audible. Yes. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The sentence, 25 years, felt both too much and not enough to Eden. It wouldn't bring her mother back, but it meant that for once, just once, a badge hadn't been a license to kill. Crawford's trial was more complex. The conspiracy charges harder to prove, but Eden's testimony about the patterns she'd observed, the connections she'd mapped, proved devastating. When he was convicted, when he was led away in the same kind of handcuffs he'd put on so many others, Eden felt something that might have been satisfaction, or might have just been emptiness. Brennan never made it to trial. He was found dead in his cell, officially a suicide, though Eden heard whispers that suggested otherwise. The network he'd been part of had long arms and no tolerance for those who might testify against them. His death meant many secrets died with him, but it also sent a message the system would eat its own to survive. On the first anniversary of Sarah's death, a monument was unveiled at Arlington National Cemetery. It wasn't just for Sarah, but for all service members who had died from violence in their own country, a number that, when Eden had researched it, had made her physically sick. She stood at the podium now, 8 years old, still clutching Mr. Whiskers, though she'd had him professionally cleaned and repaired. The crowd was massive: soldiers, civilians, families of the fallen survivors of violence, and those who simply believed in the possibility of justice. "My mother once told me that America wasn't perfect, but it was perfectible," Eden began, her voice carrying across the silent cemetery. "She said that every generation had the chance to make it better, to live up to the promises we make, but don't always keep. She died believing that even as America failed her." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some crying, some angry, all waiting. "I'm 8 years old now. By the time I'm 18, I'll have lived more years without my mother than with her. But I remember everything she taught me, every word she said, every sacrifice she made. And I've decided to believe what she believed, that America can be better. That it must be better. That we can make it better." She stepped back from the podium, and the crowd erupted in applause that felt like a promise, like a commitment, like the first real step toward the change Sarah Callahan had died trying to create. Later, as the crowds dispersed and the cameras were packed away, Eden stood at her mother's grave, the one they'd finally been able to give her with full military honors and the recognition she'd deserved in life. The headstone read, "Colonel Sarah Marie Callahan, soldier, mother, patriot." She stood for what was right, even when standing alone. Eden placed Mr. Whiskers against the headstone, a gift from daughter to mother, a piece of the childhood that had ended in a bank parking lot, but somehow continued in the fight for justice. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "Not all of it, not yet, but I started it. They know your name now. They know what you stood for. And I promise I'll keep fighting. I'll keep remembering. I'll keep making sure your death meant something." The wind picked up rustling through the cemetery trees, and for just a moment, Eden could almost hear her mother's voice on it, warm and proud and unbreaking. "That's my little warrior, forever and always, no matter what." David found her there an hour later, still standing at the grave, no longer crying, but not ready to leave either. "Time to go, kiddo," he said gently. "Rodriguez is making dinner. She says you need to eat something besides ice cream." Eden picked up Mr. Whiskers, brushing dirt from his fur. "Uncle Danny, do you think Mom would be proud of what we've done?" David looked at the grave, at the flowers people had left, at the child who had become a symbol of resistance without asking for it. "I think your mom would be amazed at what you've done. But mostly I think she'd just want you to be happy, to have the childhood she couldn't give you." "Maybe that's not possible anymore," Eden said. "Maybe some things once broken can't be fixed." "Maybe," David agreed. "But maybe they can be built into something new, something different but still good." As they walked back through the cemetery, past the rows of white headstones that marked other sacrifices, other losses, other fights for a more perfect union, Eden made a decision. She would keep fighting for justice, would keep using her voice and her memory and her platform to expose corruption and demand change. But she would also try to be 8 years old, to find joy where she could, to honor her mother not just through struggle, but through living. The sun was setting as they reached the car, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Eden of the sunrise she'd watched the morning after her mother died, when the world had seemed to end but had somehow kept turning. Rodriguez was indeed making dinner. Eden could smell it from the driveway, and there would be homework to do, and friends to see, and a life to live, despite the loss that would never fully heal. "Mom always said tomorrow was a gift," Eden said as they pulled into the driveway. "That's why we had to fight today to make sure tomorrow was better for someone else." "Your mom was a wise woman," David said. "She was a soldier," Eden corrected, but then added, "and a mom, and a hero, and a person who deserved better than she got." "All of those things," David agreed. "And her daughter is going to make sure the world remembers all of them." Eden nodded, clutching Mr. Whiskers carrying her mother's legacy in her 8-year-old hands. The fight wasn't over, might never be over, but for tonight she would eat dinner with people who loved her, would do her homework, would try to be a child while also being a symbol, a witness, a warrior for justice. The porch light was on, welcoming her home to a life her mother had died to protect, a future Sarah Callahan would never see, but had helped secure with her sacrifice. Eden walked toward it, toward tomorrow, toward whatever came next, knowing that her mother's love and courage lived on in her forever and always, no matter what.